Yeah, let's talk about the Leafs defense, because I think that was a big concern that we've had over the last few years, and the Leafs tried to address it by bringing in TJ Brodie. They, like you said, traded away Kasperi Kapanen and Andreas Janssen. Two guys were making a lot of money. That third line was making $10 million, and it didn't produce in the playoffs. Ergo, you think, okay, let's replace these guys with some cheaper depth. We're a team that's built on our star talent up front. We know that star players are what really drive results. So let's play these star players with some, complementary, cheaper depth, and it'll help us acquire that blue chip top four defenseman into TJ Brodie. They brought TJ Brodie in so far, and the Rielly Brodie pairing, the results are below 50% in shots, scoring chances, all the important metrics. They're getting outplayed at even strength. And you can talk about the difficulty of their minutes, but also look at who they play with. They tend to
They're
be
not the
playing with
top shutdown pairing though. Like their minutes
Jake
aren't easy,
Muzzin.
but they're not going against the best players.
They are some nights, and then other nights it's Muzzin Holl. Sometimes it's a bit flip floppy. But I think, to me, the bigger concern is that they're getting outplayed, and I don't think it's TJ Brodie's fault.
Other than that one game where it definitely was his
There was one
fault.
where it was very clearly TJ Brodie's fault. That was,
Yeah.
I remember having to do that
I,
report card. I'm like, okay, it doesn't get much worse than this. I think
that was
three
the
goals
Ottawa
were
game, right?
completely
That was
his
game
fault.
2 of the
Yeah.
season.
Yeah.
Was like
That was nightmare
that,
game. You
that
have
was
those
the
in the NHL.
flashback to Jake Gardiner game. That was Jake Gardner's back
I think when
game.
we're evaluating defense at the NHL level, you have to realize that there are going to be games like that
Yeah.
throughout the course of a season. You're just going to have a nightmare game where nothing goes right and the puck ends up in the back of the net a lot.
Brodie's a good player. If he has that game 1 every 10, I won't say a word. Like that's what you get for $5 million. If you want better than that, you have to pay more for 5. But if he's going to play 1 out of 10, and that's what he did in the first 10, right? Because he's generally been solid otherwise. Ultimately, I'm not really going to complain. I don't think he can run a power play, but I'm not going to complain.
Yeah, I mean, we don't need to get into the PP2 concerns of TJ Brodie walking the line compared to a Mikko Lehtinen, or I even preferred Rasmus Sandin last season. He looked like he knew what he was doing out there. We'll have to bring him up later in the show. But when we're talking about TJ Brodie at 5-on-5, what I've really liked from him is his gap in the neutral zone. I feel like he does a much better job than some of Toronto's other defensemen, i.e. Morgan Rielly, at taking away that space from opposing forwards. You look at the ability to defend the rush in the modern NHL. That's how you prevent goals, because teams are scoring mostly off the rush. I want to say 3/4 of goals come off the rush within 5 to 10 seconds of gaining the blue line. Once you're facing a set defense, I know Sheldon Keefe has talked about this a lot. When the other team gets set defensively and you're going up against a 4 or 5 man unit in their own end, it's very difficult to break that down. And I think we've seen the Leafs a few times this season stuck with the puck on the perimeter where they're trying to break down the defense. But it's hard when you have a team that can just set themselves up with 4 or 5 guys, pack the slot, park the bus, the Barry Trotz system that we see in Long Island. It's hard to break that down. So you want to be able to create offense off the rush offensively. The best way to defend that is by maintaining a tight gap in transition, not letting them gain the zone, not letting them make a pass after gaining the zone. And if you look at Morgan Rielly, I've tried to break it down with a few video clips. There's so much space that he's giving opposing forwards when they're breaking down a 2-on-2 rush, a 3-on-3 rush, just basic hockey plays, and they're gaining the zone cleanly and creating a cycle. And now you're stuck in your own end. A lot of bad things are happening. We know he's a special offensive player, but over the last few years, the excuse for his poor results have been, well, he has bad partners, quality of line mates. Who's he had over the last few years? I mean, Tyson Barrie last year, the year before that, Ron Hainsey for a couple
Cody
seasons, Nikita
Ceci last
Zaitsev,
year,
Cody Ceci in the playoffs. That
arguably
happened.
worse. I don't know who's
So
worse between Ceci and Barry, but either way.
that's always been my excuse for Rielly, because I go, you know what, get this guy an actual legit top four partner and the results will come. TJ Brodie, even though he's a difficult player to evaluate because he spent most of his career strapped to Mark Giordano, and the few seasons he played away from him, there were mixed results. But I think when you're trying to break down play individually, you're looking, okay, what is Brodie doing to drive results? What is Rielly doing to drive results? I like it when Rielly jumps up into the play, activates, and makes him a nice play off the rush. There are a lot of times where Rielly gets stuck in the offensive zone ahead of the play, and there's a forward covering for him. And whether it's a Mitch Marner or an Austin Matthews, I think what I'm starting to realize is that forwards are not as good at defending the rush as defensemen. And that goes without saying. It's not in their job description as often. You're not as good at skating backwards and maintaining a tight gap. But what I'm thinking about is if a defenseman's activating every single time the same way that Morgan Rielly does, or you think of a Roman Josi in Nashville, how much is that just by design going to result in you giving up a lot off the rush the other way because it's a forward covering for you?
So I have a little bit of a theory on Morgan Rielly, and I shouldn't just take credit for it myself because Declan, one of the other Maple Leaf Hot Stove contributors, and myself were just talking about this, and we've been talking about this for years. So I believe Morgan Rielly played a little bit of forward as like a minor hockey player. I mean, I'm sure he did. And in junior, like he basically lost his draft year, right? Like he barely played because of that injury.
I want to say he played 4 or 5 games. Yeah.
Like right, like he didn't really much of an opportunity to actually play the defense position. And if you watched him, especially coming out of junior, like when he went right to the Leafs, like he tried to go end to end like all the time because that was how he played in junior. And I'm sure he could do it in junior. Like, I've seen a few of his highlights, as I'm sure everybody else has. And like, it's pretty insane, right? He'll get the puck, he'll wind up. And in junior, you can do that kind of stuff. And he's adjusted to that. Like he's become that one year where he had 20 goals and he led all D-men in scoring, which wasn't that long ago, by the way. He was really good at like joining the rush and being the trailer and using his wrist shot. But ultimately, when you see him, like he skates like a forward, like often, especially like as a defender. Like he's skating on his toes most of the time. Like he's very rarely on his heels. And by that I mean if you're watching most defensemen when they skate, they're on their heels because you're told as a young age, like to skate backwards, like sit in the chair, right? Everybody's heard it. Like you're gonna put your butt out, you're gonna bend your knees, and you're gonna get into your stance, and you're gonna square up your shoulders with your opponent. But if you watch Rielly, he's often cheating or he's not squaring himself up defensively. Like he just doesn't play it most often as like a standard defenseman. But if you
And this
watch
is
him,
how
like
he's skating backwards, defending a rush.
yeah, he's looking for opportunities to like, poke the puck up and then transition the other way. Like his gap control is not always there. He's not playing it as you would a standard defenseman. Jake Gardiner used to do the same thing, right? And he did play forward a little bit as well. And
So
he
did
would
Justin
also
Holl,
do
if
like
memory
if the
serves,
guy was
right?
beating him wide, he would turn the other way. Like he wouldn't turn with them as the guy was taking him wide.
Oh,
He would
there's the
turn
classic Game 7 Jake DeBrusk. I just don't want to
right.
think about it.
But he would do it. That wasn't the only time. Like he would do it regularly. But all that to say, like that's kind of my thing on Rielly. I think off the rush, he struggles with when teams are attacking him to identify like what he should be doing, who his assignment is, where he should be going. Um, like there was one play, and it was in the last game, and it was called a good play on the broadcast. But McDavid was going down against Brodie, and Rielly like literally skated across the ice. Like it was, he basically made it a 1-on-2, and McDavid saw it, so he tried passing it backdoor, and Rielly was able to recover it. But if he didn't recover it, it would have been one of those plays that just every analyst like shows and just says like he skated over and left this guy wide open. And he kind of got lucky picking it off a little bit to some degree. But that's always kind of been my thing on him. But if you watch him, like he'll battle hard. Um, he'll win battles to like get the puck back in the corners or whatever. But off the
When you
rush,
need to
I think is where
separate
he
an opponent
struggles.
from the puck along the boards, he's actually one of Toronto's better defensemen in that regard.
Yeah, he's
It's
he's
just the
fine
issue
at
for me
that.
is that he spends so much time in his defensive zone, and I'd rather be in the other end where Jake Muzzin and Justin Holl tend to play.
Yeah, I mean Muzzin and Hole's a really good pairing. Like it's hard to compare anybody to them on this team. Like those guys just look really good. It's actually
Travis
stunning
Dermott
how
and
good.
Zach Bogosian, the soft minutes comparable, maybe.
I like Bogosian. I know he seems to be a hot button topic, but he's steady. Like he hasn't had the first game against the Habs, he had a few penalties, but he hasn't had one game where I'm like, this guy's been an outward like disaster.
Yeah, and he's not making is. He's what,
Yeah.
like your number 6 defenseman. He's on the number 2 penalty kill unit. He's that quote unquote safe defenseman.
Yeah.
These guys tend to drive me crazy over the years. The Roman Polaks, the Nikos. But if you have one of them and he's on the bottom pair and he plays PK2 and he only plays late in games where you're holding a lead, and otherwise, if you're trailing, you're probably not going to play him too much in the third period. I think you can live with that kind of guy. I do
Yeah.
wonder, does that player need to start every single game of the regular season so that you're not playing Erasmus Sandin or you're not playing a Travis Dermott, Mikko Lehtinen as much as you should be to try to see what you have there?
I I think their thought is there. This is my just opinion on their thought, which I kind of get, is at least we know what we're getting out of Bogosian, but all three of those other guys are wild cards. So we don't want to pair two wild cards together, but we're happy to pair one quote unquote wild card with Bogosian, who will be their safety net, and at least they know what they can get from him.
I was going to argue that Dermott's been pretty consistent at even strength this year, but I know what you mean by wild card. You're talking about the risks that they're taking on the ice when they pinch, when they activate into the play. Dermott, as much as I love his tight gap, every so often he'll get caught. You want to make sure that you have someone back there to make sure it's not a breakaway. So there's a lot of the times when we're talking about a good defense pairing, you need that chemistry. You need a guy who you know is going to be the go guy, you know, Morgan Rielly, and someone who's a bit more defensively responsible. Oddly enough, on the Jake Muzzin Justin Holl pairing, Holl is usually the one that you recognize because he's the one who's jumping up into the play and activating at the right times. You'll see him activate off the rush to try to make it a 4-on-2 at certain times, give the Leafs numbers. Jake Muzzin, you might go a full game or two without really noticing him much because he tends to be the last guy back, but he's always standing in the right spots defensively on the PK. He has a good stick. I don't think we need to talk too much about Jake Muzzin because if you've watched him play at all, you know what you're getting. He's pretty
Probably
consistent.
Dubas's best trade.
Yeah. What was the package for that? Because it was a first, I want to say Grunstrom and
Sean Durzi.
Yep.
And
I mean,
I
that's
actually
steep
like
price,
Grunstrom. I
but
think he's decent.
you got a legit top pair defenseman for it. So I think you do that trade 10 times out of 10.
11.